Have you ever had the situation where your telephoto or prime lens was too much lens for the scene you wish to photograph? In today's episode, I will show you a simple technique that you can use next time you left your wide angle behind. And I will show you why this might even be better than using a wide angle lens in the first place. My name is Sabine and I'm a professional wildlife photographer working for Pangolin photo safaris in Chobe National Park right here in Botswana, where I help my guests get the best shots while out on safari. If you would like to join our growing community of wildlife photography enthusiasts, subscribe to our channel and never miss a new tutorial, review or destination video. Imagine a beautiful leopard lying in a tree, and all you can fit in the frame is the leopard itself or a close-up of the animal. While these tight shots can be nice because of the amount of detail they show, a wider composition that includes some of the surroundings can give a better sense of the environment. And a technique that I often use to include some of the habitat as well is panorama stitching. Most people only think of panoramas when photographing landscapes, but it can work just as great in wildlife photography. With a panorama, the idea is to take multiple images of the scene and let a software like Adobe Lightroom or Photoshop stitch them together into one final image. Since there's going to be a slight delay between each shot, this technique will only work on stationary or very slow-moving subjects. And because you don't want the exposure or white balance to change between the individual frames, set your camera to full manual mode and to either a white balance preset like daylight or cloudy, according to the situation, or to manual white balance where you can adjust the color temperature to your liking. I would also recommend switching from continuous shooting to single shooting so that you don't end up with endless shots of the same part of the panorama. Because I often shoot panoramas in between my normal shooting, I've set up a custom shooting mode with these settings so that I don't need to spend a long time changing back and forth. All you need to do now is take as many shots as needed to include the scene you want. I like to start with the first frame being the subject, and then I work my way to one side, up or down as needed, and over to the other side. This way I will always know what the first frame of the panorama is when stitching them in Lightroom. You can, of course, like some people, use the trick of taking an image of your hand before and after the panorama shots. This is helpful, especially when doing multiple attempts on the same panorama. Important is that each frame overlaps by roughly 1/3 with the previous frame to ensure seamless stitching in the software later. Portrait orientation is generally recommended for taking panoramas, as you can fit more in the vertical plane and often don't have to take as many rows. However, since portrait orientation does not feel very natural to me, I often take landscape orientation, and it still works perfectly. Once you have taken all the shots you need to include the subject and the background, you can stitch these together in the photo software of your choice. There are many programs out there that can do this, but I will demonstrate it in Adobe Lightroom. Simply select all the frames of your panorama and then right-click to go to Photo Merge, Panorama. Lightroom will now generate a preview, and you have the option to choose between 3 different projection methods to see which one looks best. A feature that I found very helpful is the Fill Edges option. Once enabled, the content-aware fill will generate pixels to fill in the blank areas. But in case it does not produce a convincing result, try the boundary warp instead. This slider helps fill in the lost areas by warping the image slightly. It is a delicate balance though. Too much warp can introduce unwanted distortions. Alternatively, you could also choose auto crop and lose the empty areas altogether. Auto settings I generally leave unchecked as I edit the panorama after stitching, But if you like a quick auto edit to start out with, feel free to enable this feature. You will still be able to fine-tune the edit after stitching as well. Creating a stack is useful to keep your Lightroom catalog nice and tidy, and it will hide the individual frames used behind the stitched panorama. The stack can then be expanded or collapsed as needed. Alright, let's click Merge so that Lightroom stitches the images together, creating the final panorama as a DNG file. For those of you that don't know, a DNG is a universal raw image format developed by Adobe, so you are still working with a lossless format. And there we go, the panorama is created and you can now edit the image to your liking. Okay, now to the reason why I like this method so much and often prefer it over using my wider lens. If we look at the size of the created panorama, you can see that it is massive, and zooming in shows an exceptional amount of detail, way more than my wide-angle lens could ever produce. Also, if this shot had been taken with a wider lens, the depth of field would have not been the same. Unless you are super close to the subject, which then defeats the purpose of including the surroundings. A wide lens has a much larger depth of field, even when shot at its widest aperture setting. Using a long focal length with a wide aperture instead results in much more compression and therefore a paper-thin depth of field, almost simulating a medium format look by creating creamy, out-of-focus areas that make the subject pop. Here are a few more examples that I've taken using this technique. I hope today's video was helpful and you learned a new skill that you can use next time you're in the field. If you'd like to join me on a photo safari in the future, check the link below. Thank you for watching and until next time.